The campus at 2 a.m. was a different world entirely, stripped of its daytime chaos and reduced to pools of amber light scattered across empty walkways. Austin had been making these solitary journeys for 4 months now, ever since the realization hit him like a freight train that what he felt for his roommate James wasn't just admiration or friendship, but something far more dangerous and impossible. The cool October air bit at his cheeks as he pulled his hoodie tighter, following his usual route past the library and around the quad, where the old oak trees cast shadows that seemed to understand the weight of secrets. If you've ever felt like you're carrying something too heavy to share, drop a red heart in the comments. These walks had become his lifeline, the only time he could breathe without measuring every glance, every word, every involuntary smile that might give him away. During the day, sharing their cramped dorm room felt like walking through a minefield of unspoken feelings. James would emerge from the shower with a towel around his waist, water still beating on his shoulders from lacrosse practice, and Austin would pretend to be deeply absorbed in his textbook while his heart hammered against his ribs. James would flop onto his bed with that easy, unconscious grace that athletes possessed, running his hands through his damp hair while talking about his day, completely unaware that Austin was memorizing every detail, every casual gesture that would replay in his mind during these midnight wanderings. The worst part wasn't the wanting. Austin had come to terms with being gay years ago, had weathered that particular storm of self-discovery with the help of online communities and a few trusted friends from high school who he kept in touch with through carefully worded text messages. The worst part was how genuinely good James was as a person, how their easy roommate banter had evolved into something that felt dangerously close to real friendship. James would save Austin a seat in their shared sociology class, would ask his opinion on everything from which protein bars to buy to whether his latest essay made any sense, would stay up late helping Austin with calculus even though he had early morning practice. Austin kicked at a loose piece of gravel, watching it skitter across the empty pathway. The friendship was real. That was what made this so impossibly complicated. James wasn't just some unattainable crush he could eventually get over. James was kind without trying to be, funny in ways that suggested genuine intelligence rather than just athletic popularity, and vulnerable in moments when he thought no one was paying attention. Austin had witnessed James video calling his little sister to help her with homework, had seen him quietly slip dining hall fruit into his backpack to give to the homeless man who sometimes sat outside the campus gates, had watched him struggle with organic chemistry until 3 a.m. because he was too proud to ask for help but too determined to give up. The irony wasn't lost on Austin that he'd started these walks to escape from James, only to spend the entire time thinking about him anyway. But out here, at least, he could let his guard down. He could acknowledge the flutter in his stomach when James laughed at something Austin said, could admit how much he looked forward to their late-night conversations when they were both too tired to maintain the careful boundaries of daytime interaction. In the safety of darkness and solitude, Austin could even acknowledge the moments that made him wonder, the way James sometimes looked at him a beat too long, the way their casual touches seemed to linger, the way James had started sharing things with Austin that he claimed he'd never told anyone else. But wondering was dangerous territory. Austin had been down that road before with straight friends, had learned the hard way how easy it was to mistake kindness for something more, to project his own feelings onto innocent interactions until he'd nearly destroyed friendships that mattered to him. James was straight. Not obviously, performatively straight like some of the guys on his team who seemed to view homophobia as a sport, but straight in the quiet, assumed way of someone who'd simply never had reason to question it. He talked about girls with genuine interest, had dated consistently throughout high school according to the stories he'd shared, and carried himself with the unconscious confidence of someone who'd never had to hide a fundamental part of who he was. Austin's breath formed small clouds in the cold air as he rounded the corner past the student center, following the route he'd memorized through months of repetition. These walks were his pressure valve, the only thing standing between him and the kind of emotional explosion that would destroy everything. Because that was the thing about living with someone you were falling for. There was no escape from the constant, low-level torture of proximity. James's schedule was burned into Austin's memory. He knew that James had philosophy at 10 on Tuesdays and Thursdays, that he'd come back from practice on Wednesdays exhausted and usually grabbed a 20-minute nap before dinner, that he video called his parents every Sunday at 7 and always sounded younger and more uncertain during those conversations. Living with unrequited feelings was like carrying around a bruise that everyone kept accidentally bumping into. Every casual kindness from James was a reminder of what Austin couldn't have. Every time James brought a girl back to their room for study sessions that ran late and involved too much laughter, Austin would find reasons to disappear until he was sure she was gone. These walks had become his survival strategy, his way of maintaining the careful emotional distance that kept their friendship intact. The campus was beautiful at this hour, peaceful in a way that felt almost sacred. Austin could pretend, during these solitary hours, that the daytime complications didn't exist. He could let himself remember James's laugh without the accompanying stab of hopelessness. He could think about their conversations without analyzing every word for hidden meaning. He could simply miss someone who was sleeping 20 feet away from him without the crushing weight of knowing that missing him was pointless. Austin pulled out his phone to check the time, 2:47 a.m. He'd been walking for nearly an hour, long enough to exhaust some of the restless energy that had been building all evening. James had spent the afternoon helping Austin move their furniture around because Austin had claimed he needed better light for studying, but really he just needed an excuse to work alongside James. To share the easy companionship of a common task without the weight of conversation. The memory of James's focused concentration, the way he'd asked Austin's opinion on every small decision, the brief moment when their hands had brushed reaching for the same corner of the desk, all of it had left Austin too wired to sleep. Tomorrow he'd wake up and slip back into the careful role of good roommate and trusted friend, would listen to James's stories and offer advice and pretend that every casual touch didn't send electricity through his entire nervous system. But tonight, in the safety of darkness and distance, Austin could acknowledge the truth he spent his days carefully burying. He was completely, hopelessly in love with someone he could never have. The next Tuesday night, I was lacing up my sneakers when James looked up from his textbook. Mind if I tag along tonight? I froze, one shoe half tied. What? Your walk. I've been watching you head out every night for months, and honestly, I could use some air. This organic chemistry is melting my brain. He stretched, his shirt riding up slightly, and I quickly looked away. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was exactly what I'd been trying to avoid, James invading the one space I had to process my feelings about him. I don't know. I usually just walk around. It's pretty boring. Boring sounds perfect right now. He was already reaching for his jacket. Unless you'd rather go alone? I don't want to intrude on your thing. The hopeful note in his voice caught me off guard. James Morrison, star of the varsity soccer team, wanted to spend time wandering campus in the dark with his antisocial roommate. It didn't make sense, but the genuine request in his eyes made it impossible to say no. Sure, I managed. Just, don't expect riveting conversation. He grinned, that easy smile that had been my undoing since September. Trust me, after 3 hours of molecular structures, silence sounds amazing. We stepped out into the crisp November air, and I immediately felt the difference. My solitary walks had a meditative quality, just me, my thoughts, and the rhythm of my footsteps. With James beside me, every sensation felt amplified. I was hyper-aware of the space between us, maybe 2 feet of charged air that seemed to hum with possibility I knew was all in my head. God, it's nice out here, James said, breathing deeply. I forget sometimes that there's a world outside the library and the gym. I nodded, not trusting my voice. We walked toward the quad, our footsteps oddly synchronized. James seemed content with the quiet at first, but as we passed under the old oak trees, he started talking. Can I ask you something? You always seem so. I don't know, centered. Like you've got it all figured out. He kicked at a fallen leaf. How do you do that? The question startled me. Centered was the last thing I felt. I was a mess of unspoken feelings and careful self-control. I definitely don't have anything figured out. Come on. You know exactly what you want to major in. You're not stressed about impressing anyone. You just exist. Comfortably. There was something wistful in his tone. I envy that. I almost laughed. If only he knew how uncomfortable my existence actually was, especially around him. You're James Morrison. You're captain of the soccer team. You have a full ride. Everyone likes you. What could you possibly envy about me? He was quiet for so long I thought I'd overstepped. We'd reached the fountain at the center of campus, and he stopped walking, staring into the dark water. Do you ever feel like you're performing? Like every day you wake up and put on this version of yourself that everyone expects to see, but it's not really you. The raw honesty in his voice made my chest tight. This wasn't the James the first knew from our surface-level roommate interactions, the guy who made easy jokes and seemed to glide through college without a care. This was someone vulnerable, someone struggling. Yeah, I said quietly. I know that feeling. My parents have my whole life mapped out. Graduate, maybe go pro if I'm good enough. If not, then law school like my dad. Marry some girl from the right family, have kids, live in the same town where I grew up. He sat on the fountain's edge, elbows on his knees. And everyone just assumes that's what I want because it's what I'm supposed to want. I sat beside him, careful to maintain distance even though part of me wanted to offer some kind of comfort. What do you want? That's just it. I don't know. I've never let myself think about it because the path was already decided. He looked at me sideways. That probably sounds pathetic. It sounds human. Something shifted in his expression, like he was seeing me differently. You really don't judge, do you? Like, ever. Everyone's fighting their own battles. Who am I to judge? See, that's what I mean. That kind of perspective. I wish I had that. He was quiet for a moment. Can I tell you something I've never told anyone? My pulse quickened. Of course. Sometimes I lie awake at night and wonder what would happen if I just didn't show up. To practice, to the life everyone expects me to live. If I just disappeared and started over somewhere else, as whoever I actually am underneath all this. He gestured at himself like his identity was a costume he wanted to shed. The pain in his voice was so familiar it hurt. How many nights had I stared at the ceiling of our dorm room, listening to him breathe and wishing I could be anyone other than who I was. Wishing I could want something simpler, something possible. You wouldn't have to disappear, I said carefully. You could just start making different choices. Small ones at first. Like what? Like taking walks at midnight instead of going to bed early for practice. I managed a small smile. Like having conversations about what you actually think instead of what you're supposed to think. He turned to face me fully, and in the lamplight, his eyes looked almost desperate. Is that what you do? Make choices based on what you want instead of what's expected. The irony was crushing. Every choice I made was designed to hide what I wanted, to protect myself and our friendship from the truth of my feelings. But maybe that wasn't what he needed to hear right now. I tried to, I said. It's not always easy. No, I bet it's not. He stood up, hands shoved deep in his pockets. Thanks for letting me come tonight. And for listening. I know I'm probably not making much sense. You're making perfect sense. As we walked back toward the dorms, James seemed lighter somehow, like voicing his doubts had released some of the pressure he'd been carrying. But I felt heavier with each step. The James I'd been nursing feelings for had been an idealized version, attractive but distant, unattainable in his apparent certainty about who he was and what he wanted. This James, the one walking beside me now, was real. Complicated and searching and painfully human. He was also infinitely more dangerous to my carefully constructed emotional walls because now I didn't just want him. I understood him. And that understanding felt like the beginning of something I couldn't afford to let grow. Back in our room, as we got ready for bed, James paused by his desk. Austin, would it be okay if I joined you again tomorrow night? This was helpful. I should have said no. Should have protected the boundary between my private emotional processing and our shared space. But the tentative hope in his question undid me. Sure, I said, sealing my fate. Same time. He smiled, and for just a moment, it felt like we were conspirators in something larger than late-night walks. Like we were building something together, even if I couldn't name what it was. As I lay in bed that night, listening to James settle into sleep, I realized my carefully maintained distance had just collapsed. Tomorrow night, and probably the night after that, James would be there beside me in the darkness, sharing pieces of himself I'd never expected to see. The walks that had been my refuge from wanting him were about to become something entirely different. And despite every logical reason to be terrified, I found myself looking forward to tomorrow's midnight conversation with an anticipation that felt dangerously close to hope. The morning after our first walk together, I woke to find James already gone from our room, his bed neatly made with military precision. I should have felt relieved to have some space to process everything that had happened between us the night before, but instead I found myself listening for his footsteps in the hallway, checking my phone for messages that never came. The vulnerability he'd shown me, the way he looked at me when he talked about performing a version of himself that wasn't real, It had shifted something fundamental in the atmosphere between us. And I couldn't shake the feeling that we were both pretending everything was normal when nothing felt normal anymore. When James finally returned that evening, he seemed different somehow, more aware of the space between us as we moved around our small dorm room. I caught him watching me as I organized my desk, his gaze lingering on my hands as I shuffled through papers, and when our eyes met he didn't look away immediately like he used to. Instead, he held my gaze for a beat too long, something unreadable flickering across his features before he turned back to his textbook. The air felt charged with an energy I didn't dare name, and I found myself hyper-aware of every sound he made, every shift of his body on his bed just a few feet from mine. "So," he said casually, not looking up from his reading, "same time tonight?" The question sent a jolt through my chest, and I realized I'd been both dreading and hoping he would ask. The smart thing would be to make an excuse, to reclaim my solitary walks before this thing between us grew into something I couldn't control. But the memory of his openness the night before, the way he'd trusted me with his doubts and fears, made it impossible to pull away. "Sure," I heard myself say, and the small smile that crossed his face made my stomach flutter in a way that terrified me. That night's walk started the same way as the previous one, with James falling into step beside me as we left the dorm and headed toward the quad. But there was an ease to our movement together now, a natural rhythm that felt like we'd been walking side by side for years instead of just once before. He seemed more relaxed tonight, less guarded, and when he started talking about his day, I noticed the way his voice took on a different quality when it was just the two of us, softer, more genuine, stripped of the performative confidence he wore around everyone else. "I keep thinking about what you said last night," he told me as we passed under a streetlight, its glow catching the gold in his hair. "About how I seem like I have it all figured out. It's funny, because I've been thinking the same thing about you." "Me?" I laughed, the sound coming out more nervous than I intended. "Trust me, I definitely don't have anything figured out." "But you do, though," he insisted, stopping to face me fully. "You're so comfortable with who you are, so confident in your own skin. I watch you sometimes and wonder what that must feel like, to just exist without constantly questioning every choice you make." The irony of his words hit me like a physical blow. If only he knew how uncomfortable I was, how much of my energy went into hiding the most fundamental truth about myself, how I spent every day in our shared room hyper-aware of his presence and terrified he might notice the way I looked at him. But I couldn't tell him any of that without revealing everything, so I just shook my head and started walking again. "You're seeing what you want to see," I said quietly. "Everyone's performing to some degree. Everyone's got things they keep hidden. Even you," he asked, and there was something in his tone that made me glance at him sharply. He was watching me with an intensity that made my pulse quicken, like he was trying to read something in my expression. "What do you keep hidden, Austin?" The question hung in the air between us, loaded with possibility and danger. For a moment, I considered telling him everything about the months of secret walks, about the way I felt when he smiled at me, about how sharing a room with him was both the best and worst kind of torture. But the fear of losing him, of making things awkward between us, kept the words locked in my throat. "Everyone's got their secrets," I said instead, which wasn't really an answer at all. He nodded slowly, but I could see he wasn't satisfied with my evasion. We walked in silence for a while, the quiet comfortable but charged with unspoken things. When we reached the library steps where we'd sat the night before, he settled down on the concrete without discussion, and I found myself sitting closer to him than I had before. Close enough that I could smell his cologne, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body in the cool night air. "Can I tell you something?" he said eventually, his voice so quiet I had to lean in to hear him properly. "Something I've never told anyone?" My heart started beating faster, but I nodded, not trusting my voice. "Sometimes I lie awake at night and think about what would happen if I just stopped," he said, staring out at the darkened campus. "If I quit the team, changed my major, told my parents I didn't want the life they've planned for me. And the thing is, it doesn't scare me as much as it should. The idea of disappointing everyone, of not being who they expect me to be, it used to terrify me. But lately, it almost feels like relief." "What changed?" I asked, though part of me was afraid to hear the answer. He was quiet for so long I thought he might not respond. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I don't know. Maybe it's these talks we've been having. Maybe it's just being around someone who doesn't expect me to be anything other than myself." He turned to look at me then, and the expression on his face was so vulnerable, so open, that I felt my carefully constructed walls crumbling. You make me feel like it's okay to just be me, Austin. Do you know how rare that is? The words hit me like a punch to the chest. He had no idea what he was doing to me, how every confession drew me deeper into feelings I couldn't afford to have. The rational part of my brain was screaming at me to pull back, to create some distance before this went too far. But sitting there next to him, seeing the trust in his eyes, feeling like maybe I was the only person who really knew this version of him, I couldn't bring myself to run. You don't have to perform for me, I managed to say, my voice hoarse with emotion I was trying to suppress. You never have to pretend to be anyone else when you're with me. Something shifted in his expression, a softness that made my breath catch. For a moment we just looked at each other, and I swear I could feel the space between us humming with electricity. Then he smiled, that real smile I was starting to treasure, and reached over to bump my shoulder with his. Same time tomorrow, he asked, and I knew I was lost. The pattern continued for the next week. Every night, James would appear beside me as I headed out for my walk, falling into step like it was the most natural thing in the world. Our conversations grew deeper, more intimate, covering everything from childhood fears to dreams we'd never spoken aloud. He told me about the pressure he felt to live up to his older brother's achievements, about how sometimes he felt like he was watching his life happen to someone else. I found myself sharing things I'd never told anyone, my anxiety about the future, my struggle to figure out where I belonged, my fear that I was fundamentally different from everyone around me in ways they could never accept. What I didn't tell him was how I was falling deeper with every conversation, how the sound of his laugh had become my favorite thing in the world, how I'd started looking forward to our walks with an intensity that bordered on desperation. I didn't tell him how I studied his face when he talked, memorizing the way his eyes crinkled when he really smiled, the habit he had of running his hand through his hair when he was thinking. I definitely didn't tell him about the dreams I'd started having, or how I had to bite my tongue to keep from saying something that would ruin everything between us. But I was starting to notice things that made my chest tight with hope and terror in equal measure. The way James had begun sitting closer to me during our talks, how his hand would sometimes brush against mine when we walked. The way he looked at me when he thought I wasn't paying attention, his gaze lingering on my mouth when I spoke. There were moments when the air between us felt charged with something more than friendship, when I caught him watching me with an expression I couldn't quite decode, but that made my heart race. It was during our 8th walk together that everything started to unravel. We'd been talking about relationships, a topic that always made me nervous, but that James seemed determined to explore. He'd been asking about my dating history, why I never seemed interested in the girls in our classes, and I'd been deflecting as carefully as I could without outright lying. I just don't understand it, he said as we sat on our usual spot on the library steps. You're smart, funny, good-looking, why aren't you dating anyone? The compliment sent heat flooding through my chest, but I forced myself to shrug casually. Just haven't met the right person, I guess. But what's the right person like? He pressed, and there was something in his tone that made me look at him more carefully. What do you look for in someone? It was such a loaded question, especially coming from him. I could feel my palms starting to sweat as I tried to figure out how to answer without giving myself away. I don't know, I said finally. Someone who makes me feel comfortable being myself. Someone I can talk to about anything. Someone who gets me, you know? He nodded slowly, but I could see wheels turning behind his eyes. That sounds nice, he said quietly. I don't think I've ever had that with anyone. What about all those girls you've dated? I asked, though bringing up his romantic history always made me feel slightly sick. That's just it, he said, running a hand through his hair in that gesture I'd come to love. I've never felt that connection with any of them. I keep thinking there's something wrong with me, like maybe I'm just not capable of that kind of feeling. The pain in his voice made me want to reach out and comfort him, but I kept my hands firmly planted on the concrete step. There's nothing wrong with you, James. Sometimes it just takes time to find the right connection. Maybe, he said, but he sounded doubtful. Or maybe I've been looking in the wrong places. Something about the way he said it made my stomach clench with a mixture of hope and fear. I glanced at him and found him staring at me with that unreadable expression again, the one that made me feel like he was trying to figure something out. The moment stretched between us, loaded with possibility, and I felt my carefully maintained composure starting to crack. I should probably head back, I said abruptly, standing up too quickly. Early class tomorrow. If James was surprised by my sudden retreat, he didn't show it. But I caught the flash of something that might have been disappointment across his features before he nodded and followed me back toward the dorms. We walked in silence, the easy rhythm we'd developed feeling stilted and awkward now. When we reached our room, I mumbled a quick goodnight and practically dove into my bed, pulling the covers over my head and trying to ignore the way James was moving around the room, getting ready for sleep just a few feet away. I lay awake for hours that night, replaying our conversation and trying to decipher the meaning behind his words. Maybe I've been looking in the wrong places. What did that mean? Was I reading too much into everything, seeing signs that weren't really there because I wanted them so badly? Or was there actually something shifting between us, something that terrified and thrilled me in equal measure? The next morning, I woke up determined to create some distance. This thing between us, whatever it was getting too intense. I was losing my ability to hide my feelings, and James was asking too many questions I couldn't answer honestly. I needed to protect both of us from the disaster that would inevitably come if I let this continue. So when evening came and I saw James looking at me expectantly, I grabbed my textbook and settled at my desk. "I think I'm going to skip the walk tonight," I said, not meeting his eyes. Got a lot of reading to catch up on. I could feel his gaze on me, could sense his confusion, but I forced myself to focus on the pages in front of me. After a moment, I heard him sigh and leave the room alone. The silence that followed felt oppressive, and I found myself reading the same paragraph over and over without absorbing any of it. Part of me wanted to run after him, to fall back into the easy intimacy we'd been building, but I made myself stay put. The next night, I made another excuse, and then another. Each time, James looked more hurt and confused, but he didn't push. He just nodded and left me alone, and I told myself I was doing the right thing even as it felt like I was tearing something precious apart with my bare hands. By the fourth night of avoiding our walks, James had clearly had enough. He planted himself between me and my desk, arms crossed, an expression of determination on his face that I'd never seen directed at me before. "Okay, what's going on?" he demanded. "Did I do something wrong? Say something that upset you." "Nothing's wrong," I lied, trying to step around him to reach my books. "I just have a lot of work to catch up on." "Bullshit," he said flatly, not moving out of my way. "We've been talking every night for over a week, and suddenly you can't spare an hour? That's not like you, Austin." The way he said my name, with such familiarity and concern, made my resolve waver. But I couldn't give in now, not when I was finally starting to get some emotional distance. "Maybe you don't know me as well as you think you do," I said, immediately regretting the words when I saw how they landed. James looked like I'd slapped him. The hurt that flashed across his face was so raw, so genuine, that I almost broke down and told him everything right then. Instead, I forced myself to look away, to maintain the cruel distance I was trying to create. "Fine," he said quietly, stepping aside. "I get it. I'll leave you alone." He grabbed his jacket and headed for the door, but something in his posture, the defeated slump of his shoulders, the way he paused with his hand on the doorknob like he was hoping I'd call him back, made me realize I was about to lose something irreplaceable. "James, wait," I called out, but he was already gone, the door clicking shut behind him with a finality that made my chest ache. I spent the next 2 hours staring at my textbook without reading a word, replaying the hurt in his voice and hating myself for putting it there. When he finally came back, his hair was messed up from the wind and his cheeks were flushed with cold. He didn't look at me, just went straight to his bed and turned away from my side of the room. The silence between us felt different now, not comfortable but heavy with unspoken hurt and confusion. I wanted to apologize, to explain, to bridge the gap I'd created, but I didn't know how to do that without revealing everything I was trying to hide. So I said nothing, and the distance between us stretched wider with each passing minute. The silence that stretched between us felt like a physical weight pressing down on my chest. James stood there in the lamplight, his face a mixture of hurt and confusion that made my stomach twist with guilt. I could see him trying to process my cold response, trying to understand what had gone so wrong between us. "Austin," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't understand. Did I do something wrong? Say something that upset you." The genuine pain in his voice nearly broke my resolve. I wanted to take back my harsh words, to apologize and explain everything, but the fear of losing him entirely kept me frozen. Instead, I shook my head and started walking back toward our dorm, hoping he would just let it go. But James wasn't giving up that easily. He caught up to me in a few quick strides, his hand reaching out to touch my shoulder. "Please don't walk away from me," he said. "Whatever this is, we can talk about it." I stopped walking but didn't turn around. His hand was warm through my jacket, and I had to fight the urge to lean into his touch. "There's nothing to talk about," I said, hating how weak my voice sounded. "I just need some space." "Space from what?" "From me." The hurt in his voice was unmistakable now. "Austin, look at me. Please." Against my better judgment, I turned around. The sight of him standing there, his eyes searching my face for answers I couldn't give, nearly undid me completely. In the soft glow of the campus lights, he looked vulnerable in a way I'd never seen before. His usual confident demeanor had cracked, revealing something raw and uncertain underneath. "These walks," he began hesitantly, "they've meant everything to me. You've meant everything to me. I know that might sound weird, but it's true. Before we started spending this time together, I felt like I was drowning. Like I was putting on this performance for everyone around me, pretending to be someone I'm not." My heart hammered against my ribs. There was something in the way he was looking at me, something in his words that made my pulse race with dangerous hope. "James, don't," I whispered, but he stepped closer. "No, I need to say this. I need you to understand." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I'd come to recognize as his nervous tell. "I've been thinking about why these walks matter so much to me, why being with you feels different than being with anyone else. And I think I've been lying to myself about a lot of things." The world seemed to tilt around me. I could barely breathe as I watched him struggle with whatever he was trying to say. Part of me wanted to stop him, to protect us both from whatever was about to change between us. But a larger part of me needed to hear what he was going to say, even if it destroyed me. "What kind of things?" I managed to ask. James looked around the empty campus, as if checking to make sure we were alone. When his eyes met mine again, there was a vulnerability there that took my breath away. "About who I am. About what I want." He paused, swallowing hard. "About how I feel when I'm with you." My legs felt unsteady. "James, I know how this sounds," he continued quickly, as if afraid he'd lose his nerve if he stopped. "I know it doesn't make sense. I've always dated girls. I've always thought I was straight. But then I started spending time with you, really spending time with you, and everything I thought I knew about myself started falling apart." I stared at him, unable to process what I was hearing. This was exactly what I'd hoped for and exactly what terrified me most. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that when I'm with you, I feel like I can finally breathe. I'm saying that I look forward to these walks more than anything else in my life. I'm saying that sometimes when we're sitting close together, talking about everything and nothing, I wonder what it would feel like to." He trailed off, shaking his head. God, I can't even say it out loud. "James." My voice was barely a whisper. "Are you telling me that you're—" "I don't know what I am," he said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "All I know is that being around you makes me question everything I thought I knew about myself. And when you started pulling away from me, it felt like losing something I didn't even know I needed." The confession hung between us like a bridge I was terrified to cross. Everything I dreamed of was right there in front of me, but I couldn't shake the fear that this was some kind of mistake, some confusion on his part that would evaporate once he really thought about it. "You're just confused," I said weakly, even as my heart screamed at me to believe him. "You're under a lot of stress with school and your family expectations. It's normal to feel close to someone who listens to you." James stepped closer, close enough that I could see the flecks of green in his brown eyes. "Don't tell me what I'm feeling, Austin. I may not understand it completely, but I know it's real. What I feel for you is real." The words hit me like a physical blow. I'd spent so many nights on these same paths, aching for exactly this moment, but now that it was here, I felt paralyzed by the implications. If James was questioning his sexuality, if he was beginning to understand something fundamental about himself, then what we were talking about wasn't just a confession of feelings. It was the potential beginning of something that would change both our lives forever. "But your family," I said desperately, grasping for reasons why this couldn't be happening. "Your image, your friends, everything people expect from you." "Fuck what people expect," James said with surprising vehemence. "I'm tired of living my life for other people's expectations. I'm tired of feeling like I'm suffocating under the weight of being who everyone thinks I should be." He reached out tentatively, his fingers barely brushing against mine. The contact sent electricity shooting up my arm, and I saw his eyes widen slightly at the connection. "The night you told me about feeling like you were watching your life from the outside," he said softly, "I understood exactly what you meant. Because that's how I felt for years. Like I was playing a role that never quite fit. But when I'm with you, when we're out here talking about real things, I feel like myself for the first time in my life." I wanted to pull my hand away, to protect both of us from the intensity of what was happening, but I couldn't make myself move. "James, this is scary. If you're having these feelings, if you're questioning things about yourself, maybe you need time to figure it out on your own. Without the complication of." "Of what?" "Of you." He caught my hand properly now, his fingers intertwining with mine. "Austin, you're not a complication. You're the first thing that's made sense to me in years." Looking down at our joined hands, I felt something inside me breaking open. All the walls I built to protect myself, all the careful distance I tried to maintain, crumbled in the face of his honesty. "I'm scared," I whispered. "So am I," he admitted. "I'm terrified. But I'm more terrified of pretending this isn't happening. Of going back to feeling disconnected from everything and everyone, including myself." We stood there in the quiet campus night, holding hands under the lamplight, both of us trembling with the magnitude of what we just acknowledged. I could feel the exact moment when everything between us shifted, when we crossed from friendship into something uncharted and fragile. "I don't know how to do this," James said quietly. "I don't know what any of this means for my life, for who I thought I was. But I know I don't want to lose you. I know I don't want to go back to pretending I don't feel what I feel." I looked up at him, seeing the fear and hope warring in his expression, and realized that my own terror was matched by an overwhelming sense of possibility. Maybe we were both scared. Maybe neither of us knew what we were doing. But for the first time since I'd started taking these late-night walks, I wasn't alone with my feelings. "What happens now?" I asked. James squeezed my hand gently. "I don't know, but I'd like to figure it out with you, if you'll let me." The question hung between us, loaded with everything we weren't yet ready to say. I thought about all the nights I'd walked these paths alone, convinced that what I felt for him would forever remain my secret. I thought about the careful distance I'd maintained, the walls I'd built, the safety of keeping my feelings locked away. Then I looked at James, really looked at him, and saw my own vulnerability reflected back at me. He was offering me something I'd never dared to hope for, the chance to be honest about who I was and what I wanted, the chance to stop hiding. "Okay," I said softly. "Okay, let's figure it out together." The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise after the longest night. We were both still scared, both still uncertain about what this meant for our futures, but in that moment, standing together under the campus lights with our hands intertwined, it felt like the beginning of something real, something worth the risk. The silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken truths and possibilities that felt both terrifying and inevitable. My heart hammered against my ribs as I watched James process my words, his face cycling through confusion, recognition, and something that looked almost like relief. The campus lights cast long shadows across the empty quad, and I felt like we were the only two people left in the world, suspended in this moment that could either save us or destroy everything we'd built together. "You're gay," James said quietly, not a question, but a statement of fact that he seemed to be testing on his tongue. There was no judgment in his voice, no disgust or surprise, just a kind of wondering acceptance that made my chest tighten with hope I didn't dare fully embrace. "Yeah," I whispered, the word barely audible even in the stillness around us. "I've known for a while now. These walks, they weren't really about clearing my head or getting exercise. They were about having somewhere to go when staying in our room became too much to handle." James turned to face me fully, his eyes searching my face in the dim light. "Too much to handle how?" The question hung between us like a bridge I could either cross or burn down. I'd already come this far, already shattered the careful walls I built around my secret. But telling him about the walks was different from telling him why they'd become necessary, why sharing a 12 by 12 dorm room with him had started feeling like a beautiful kind of torture. "Just being around people who expect you to be someone you're not," I said carefully, choosing my words like I was defusing a bomb. "Having to pretend all the time gets exhausting." James nodded slowly, and I saw something shift in his expression, a recognition that went deeper than simple understanding. "I know exactly what you mean," he said, his voice so quiet I had to lean forward to catch the words. "The pretending thing. Sometimes I feel like I'm wearing a costume that doesn't quite fit, and everyone's watching to see if I'll mess up and let them see who I really am underneath. My breath caught in my throat. There was something in the way he said it, a weight behind the words that suggested he wasn't just talking about general authenticity struggles. The hope I'd been trying to contain started spreading through my chest like warmth from a fire. What would happen if you stopped pretending? I asked, surprised by my own boldness. James was quiet for so long that I started to worry I'd pushed too far, crossed some invisible line that would send him retreating back into the safety of our surface-level friendship. But when he finally spoke, his voice was raw with vulnerability. I don't know, he admitted. I've been so focused on being what everyone expects, the good student, the reliable teammate, the son who doesn't cause problems, that I'm not sure I even know who I really am anymore. Except. He paused, looking down at his hands. Except when I'm with you. On these walks, in our room late at night when we're just talking. Those are the only times I feel like I can breathe. The admission hit me like a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs. I stared at him, trying to process what he was saying, what it might mean. The careful distance I'd been maintaining, the walls I'd built to protect my heart, they were crumbling faster than I could rebuild them. James, I started, but he held up a hand. Let me finish, he said, and I could hear the tremor in his voice. I need to say this before I lose my nerve. These past few weeks, when you started pulling away from me, it felt like I was drowning. I couldn't figure out why you were avoiding me, why you'd stopped wanting to spend time together. I kept thinking I'd done something wrong, said something that made you uncomfortable. Guilt twisted in my stomach. You didn't do anything wrong. I know that now, he said. But at the time, all I could think about was how much I missed you. How much I looked forward to our walks, to those late-night conversations in our room. How being around you made me feel more like myself than I'd ever felt with anyone else. He looked up at me then, and I saw something in his eyes that made my heart stutter, a mixture of fear and longing and desperate hope that mirrored exactly what I'd been feeling for months. I've been trying to figure out what that means, he continued. Why you matter to me so much. Why the thought of losing your friendship terrifies me more than anything else. Why I find myself thinking about you when I should be focusing on other things. Why I notice things like how your eyes look when you're really listening to someone, or the way you get this little crease between your eyebrows when you're concentrating. My hands were shaking now, and I pressed them against my thighs to try to still them. James? I think I'm gay, he said in a rush, the words tumbling out like he'd been holding them back for so long that they'd built up pressure behind his teeth. Or something. I don't know the right word for it yet. All I know is that I've never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. I felt like I was falling and flying at the same time, my heart soaring even as my mind struggled to catch up with what was happening. How do you feel about me? James laughed, but it was shaky and breathless. Terrified, he said. Confused. Like I want to know everything about you, and also like I'm afraid of what I might discover about myself in the process. Like I'd rather spend time with you than anyone else, even when we're not doing anything special. Like the idea of you being with someone else makes me feel sick. He took a deep breath, and when he spoke again, his voice was steadier. I think I'm falling for you, Austin. Actually, I don't think. I know. I'm falling for you, and it scares the hell out of me because I don't know what to do with that information. I stared at him, my mind reeling. This was everything I'd wanted to hear and everything I'd convinced myself I never could hear. James, beautiful, kind, complicated James, was sitting here telling me that he was questioning his sexuality, that he had feelings for me, that he saw me the way I saw him. You don't have to know what to do with it, I said finally, my voice hoarse with emotion. I don't know what to do with it either. I've been carrying these feelings around for months, trying to figure out how to be your friend when what I really wanted was to be so much more. You have feelings for me? He asked, and the hope in his voice was almost too much to bear. James, I said, turning to face him fully. I've been in love with you since about 2 weeks after we became roommates. These walks started because I needed somewhere to go when being around you became too intense, when I couldn't trust myself not to do something stupid like tell you how I felt or try to kiss you goodnight. His eyes widened. You've been in love with me? Completely gone for you, I confirmed, feeling lighter than I had in months. Head over heels, can't think straight. Write your name in the margins of my notebooks in love with you. James laughed, a real laugh this time, bright and surprised and full of something that sounded like joy. I write your name in my notebooks too, he admitted. I told myself I was just practicing signatures for when I had to sign team stuff, But I was really just writing Austin over and over again like some kind of lovesick teenager. We are lovesick teenagers, I pointed out, grinning despite the tears I could feel threatening at the corners of my eyes. College students, he corrected, but he was smiling too, that brilliant smile that had been the first thing to make me fall for him. Same difference, I said. The point is, we're both disasters and we're both apparently crazy about each other. James reached out tentatively, his fingers hovering just above my hand where it rested on the bench between us. Can I? He asked softly. I nodded, not trusting my voice, and he laced our fingers together. His hand was warm and slightly calloused from his workouts, and the simple contact sent electricity shooting up my arm. We sat there for a moment, just holding hands and looking at each other, and I felt like I was finally breathing properly for the first time in months. So what happens now? James asked eventually. I don't know, I admitted. I've never done this before. The whole relationship thing, I mean. I've never had feelings this strong for anyone. Neither have I, James said. I mean, I dated girls in high school, but it never felt like this. It never felt real. I always thought there was something wrong with me, that I was just a late bloomer or something. There's nothing wrong with you, I said firmly. You're figuring yourself out. That's completely normal. James squeezed my hand. I'm scared, he admitted. Not of you, not of this, but of what it means. What other people will think. What my family will say. What the team will think if they find out. We don't have to tell anyone right away, I said. We can take this as slow as you need. We can just see what happens between us first, before we worry about the rest of the world. You'd be okay with that? Keeping this between us while I figure things out? James, I said, bringing our joined hands up to rest against my chest. I've been keeping my feelings for you secret for months. I can handle a little more secrecy if it means I get to explore this with you. Relief flooded his features. I want to explore this, he said. I want to figure out what this is between us. I want to know what it feels like to kiss you, to hold you, to be with you without pretending I don't want to be. My heart hammered against my ribs. I want that too. But I need time, he continued. I need to wrap my head around all of this, figure out how to be okay with being gay or bi or whatever I am. There's no rush, I assured him. We have all the time in the world. James looked down at our hands, his thumb tracing circles across my knuckles. I keep thinking about what you said earlier. About feeling like you're wearing a costume that doesn't fit. I've felt that way for so long that I'd almost forgotten what it was like to feel comfortable in my own skin. And now I'm terrified, he said with a laugh. But also excited? Like maybe I'm finally going to get to meet the real version of myself. I lifted our joined hands and pressed a soft kiss to his knuckles, a gesture so natural it surprised me. James's breath caught, and when I looked up at him, his eyes were dark with something that made my stomach flip. Was that okay? I asked, suddenly worried I'd moved too fast. More than okay, he said quietly. It was perfect. We sat there in comfortable silence, hands still linked, watching the campus around us. The night was quiet except for the distant hum of traffic and the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. I felt like we were in a bubble, protected from the complications and fears that waited outside this moment. Austin, James said eventually. Yeah, thank you for being brave enough to tell me. About being gay, about the walks, about everything. I know it couldn't have been easy. I squeezed his hand. Thank you for not running away screaming. I thought about it, he admitted with a grin. But then I realized I'd rather be scared and honest with you than safe and pretending somewhere else. Good choice, I said, bumping his shoulder with mine. I hope so, he said, but he was smiling, and for the first time in months, I felt like everything might actually be okay. The weight of our confessions hung in the air between us, creating a charged silence that felt both terrifying and electric. James's hand was still in mine, his thumb tracing nervous circles across my knuckles as he stared down at our intertwined fingers like he was trying to memorize every detail. I could feel his pulse through his palm, quick and unsteady, matching the rapid rhythm of my own heart. I keep thinking I should be more scared, he whispered, his voice barely audible in the quiet campus night. But sitting here with you, holding your hand, it's the first time in months that I've felt like I could actually breathe. I squeezed his fingers gently, still hardly believing this was real. How long have you been feeling this way? James lifted his head, meeting my eyes with an expression so vulnerable it made my chest ache. That's the thing that's been driving me crazy. I don't think there was a single moment when it clicked. It was more like layers of realization building up until I couldn't ignore it anymore. He paused, his free hand running through his hair in that familiar gesture I'd watched him do countless times. Remember that night 3 weeks ago when you fell asleep studying at your desk? I nodded, remembering how I'd woken up the next morning with a blanket draped over my shoulders. I was the one who covered you up, he continued, his voice growing softer. And I stood there for probably 10 minutes just watching you sleep, thinking about how peaceful you looked. Then I realized I was memorizing the way your hair falls across your forehead, and the exact shade of your skin in the lamplight, and suddenly it hit me that I'd been cataloging these details about you for weeks without even realizing it. The confession sent warmth flooding through my entire body. James, I've never felt that way about anyone before, he said quickly, as if he needed to get all the words out before he lost his nerve. Not Sarah from high school, not any of the girls the team kept trying to set me up with. I thought maybe I just wasn't ready for a relationship, or that I was too focused on school and baseball to care about dating. But then you'd laugh at something stupid I said, or you'd get that little crease between your eyebrows when you're concentrating, and I'd feel this pull in my chest that I couldn't explain. I brought our joined hands up to rest against my heart, needing him to understand. I've been in love with you since October, I admitted. That night when you stayed up until 3 in the morning helping me study for my calculus midterm, even though you had practice the next morning. You were so patient with me, explaining the same concept over and over until it clicked, and when I finally got it right, you smiled like you were genuinely proud of me. James's eyes widened. October? Austin, that was almost 4 months ago. I know. I felt heat rise in my cheeks. That's why I started the walks. I was going crazy sharing a room with you, pretending everything was normal when all I wanted was to tell you how I felt. But you were James Morrison, star pitcher, with girls constantly asking about you. I convinced myself that even if you were gay, which seemed impossible, you'd never be interested in your awkward roommate who can barely throw a baseball without embarrassing himself. Are you kidding me? James turned his body toward me on the bench, his expression incredulous. Austin, you're the smartest person I know. You're kind to everyone, even when they don't deserve it. You remember things that matter to people. You listen when I talk about my fears about disappointing my parents, and you never make me feel stupid for being scared about the future. That's just being a decent friend, I protested. No, it's not. His voice grew firmer. Do you know what most of my conversations with the team are like? Surface-level stuff about games and parties and which girls they think are hot. I've never told any of them about how I lie awake at night wondering if I'm only playing baseball because it's what my dad expects. Or how sometimes I feel like I'm performing this version of myself that everyone wants to see instead of just being who I actually am. I felt something shift in my chest, a piece of understanding clicking into place. Is that why you wanted to start walking with me? Because you could be yourself? James nodded slowly. Those walks became the only time I felt real. When it was just us talking in the dark, I didn't have to be the guy who has everything figured out. I could just be James, confused and scared and trying to figure out what he actually wants from life. He paused, his grip on my hand tightening. And somewhere along the way, I realized that what I wanted was you. The words hung between us, simple and devastating in their honesty. I searched his face, looking for any sign of doubt or regret, but found only nervous hope and something that looked like relief. I'm terrified, he continued, his voice cracking slightly. I'm terrified of what this means, and what people will think, and how my parents will react. I'm terrified that I don't know how to be in a relationship with a guy, or that I'll mess this up because I'm still figuring out who I am. James, I said softly, bringing my free hand up to touch his cheek. You don't have to have it all figured out. I've known I was gay since I was 15, and I'm still terrified. This is scary for me too. He leaned into my touch, his eyes closing briefly. How do you do it? How do you be so brave about who you are? I'm not brave, I said with a shaky laugh. I've been hiding how I feel about you for months. I've been taking these walks to avoid dealing with my feelings instead of just talking to you about them. If I were brave, I would have told you the truth weeks ago. But you told me tonight, he pointed out. That took courage. Only because you made me feel safe enough to do it. I brushed my thumb across his cheekbone, marveling at the fact that I was allowed to touch him like this. You've always made me feel safe, even when I was convinced you could never feel the same way. James opened his eyes, and I could see tears gathering at the corners. I can't promise I'll be good at this right away. I don't know the first thing about being someone's boyfriend, especially not publicly. The thought of people staring at us, or making comments, or my teammates finding out. We don't have to figure all of that out tonight, I assured him. We can take this as slowly as you need. No pressure, no expectations. Just us, figuring it out together. Together, he repeated, like he was testing the word. God, I've wanted to say that for so long. I've been watching you pull away these past few weeks, and I thought I was losing my mind. I kept wondering if I'd done something wrong, or if you'd somehow figured out how I was feeling and were trying to let me down easy. I was pulling away because being around you was becoming impossible, I admitted. Every time you'd touch my shoulder, or laugh at one of my jokes, or look at me with those eyes, I felt like I was going to combust. I thought if I kept some distance, maybe I could get these feelings under control. And instead, we were both just making ourselves miserable, James said with a rueful smile. We're not very good at this whole communication thing, are we? We're learning, I said, returning his smile. Besides, I think we communicate pretty well on these walks. Something about the darkness makes it easier, to be honest. It does, he agreed. Maybe that's why I fell for you out here. No pretenses, no performances. Just you and me and the truth. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both of us processing the magnitude of what had just happened between us. The campus was quiet around us, most students already asleep, leaving us in our own private bubble of possibility. Can I ask you something? James said eventually. Anything. What happens now? Tomorrow morning, when we wake up in our room, do we pretend this didn't happen? Do we act normal around other people? I need to know what to expect. I considered his question carefully. What do you want to happen? I want to wake up and still feel this brave, he said quietly. I want to look at you and not have to hide how I feel. But I also want to take this slow, like you said. I'm not ready for grand gestures or public displays. I just want to be able to hold your hand when it's just us, and maybe figure out what it means to be together. That sounds perfect to me, I said, meaning it completely. We can keep this between us for as long as you need. No pressure, no timeline. Just us learning how to be Austin and James, the couple, instead of Austin and James, the roommates who were desperately in love with each other, but too scared to say anything. James laughed, the sound lighter than I'd heard from him in weeks. When you put it like that, it sounds pretty ridiculous that it took us this long to figure it out. Maybe we both needed to be ready, I suggested. Maybe this is exactly when it was supposed to happen. Maybe, he agreed. I just know that I don't want to waste any more time being scared of this. I want to see where it goes. Where do you want it to go? I asked, genuinely curious about his hopes and fears. James was quiet for a long moment, considering. I want to fall asleep next to you without having to pretend it's just because one of us had a nightmare. I want to bring you coffee in the morning and have it mean something. I want to learn what makes you happy and what makes you feel loved, and I want to get good at those things. He paused, his cheeks reddening slightly. And I want to kiss you, but I'm terrified I'll be terrible at it. My heart hammered against my ribs. James? I know it's too soon, he said quickly. I know I said I wanted to take things slow, and I do, but I also keep thinking about what it would be like to kiss you, and I'm driving myself crazy wondering if you want that too, or if I'm moving too fast, or if I should wait until I'm more sure about everything. James, I said more firmly, stopping his nervous rambling. I would very much like to kiss you, but only if you're sure. Not because you think you should, or because you're caught up in the moment, but because you really want to. He looked at me with those beautiful eyes, and I could see him working through his fear and uncertainty. I'm sure, he said finally. I'm scared, but I'm sure. I've been thinking about kissing you for weeks, and I'm tired of being afraid of what I want. I shifted closer to him on the bench, our knees touching. There's no rush. We can take as long as you need. I know, he said softly. That's what makes me feel safe enough to try. Slowly, carefully, James lifted his free hand to cup my face, his thumb tracing along my jawline. I could feel his hand trembling slightly, and I covered it with my own, trying to steady him. It's okay, I whispered. It's just us. He nodded, taking a shaky breath before leaning in. The kiss was tentative at first, soft and uncertain, but when I kissed him back just as gently, he relaxed into it. It was sweet and nervous and perfect, everything I'd dreamed it would be and more. When we finally pulled apart, James rested his forehead against mine, both of us breathing hard. Wow, he whispered. Yeah, I agreed. unable to keep the smile off my face. "Wow, I definitely want to do that again," he said, sounding amazed. "Like, a lot." I laughed, feeling giddy with happiness and relief. "I think that can be arranged." "Good," he said, settling back against the bench but keeping our hands intertwined. "Because I have a feeling I'm going to get addicted to this whole being honest about my feelings thing." "I hope so," I said, bringing our joined hands up to press a kiss to his knuckles. "Because I plan on being honest about how much I love you every single day." James's smile was radiant in the lamplight. "I love you too, Austin. I'm still scared, and I still have no idea what I'm doing, but I love you." "That's all we need to start with," I said. "Love and honesty in these walks where we can be ourselves." "These walks," he agreed. "Our walks now." "Our walks," I repeated, loving the sound of it. "I like that." As we sat there together, hands entwined and hearts full, I couldn't help but think about how different this walk had been from all the others. For months, I'd used these nighttime wanderings to escape from my feelings, to find peace in the solitude and darkness. But tonight, sharing this space with James, being honest about everything I'd been carrying alone, I realized that sometimes the thing you're running from is exactly what you need to run toward. 3 weeks later, I found myself checking my watch as I finished my last class of the day, that familiar flutter of anticipation settling in my chest. Our nightly walks had taken on an entirely different meaning now, and I couldn't help but smile at how naturally we'd fallen into this new rhythm together. James was already waiting by our usual meeting spot when I arrived, his backpack slung over one shoulder, and that soft smile I'd grown to love lighting up his face when he saw me approaching. The November air had gotten colder, and I could see his breath forming small clouds as he spoke. "Ready for our walk?" he asked, reaching for my hand without hesitation. The gesture still sent warmth shooting through me, even after 3 weeks of stolen touches and quiet moments together. "Always," I replied, intertwining our fingers as we set off toward the familiar path that had become our sanctuary. We walked in comfortable silence for the first few minutes, both of us seeming to understand that these walks served a different purpose now. They weren't just my escape anymore, or James's way of avoiding his thoughts. They'd become our time to process this new reality we were building together, to talk through the fears and excitement that came with each small step forward. "I talked to Coach Martinez today," James said eventually, his voice carrying a note of something I couldn't quite identify. "About maybe taking a break from the team next semester." I stopped walking, turning to face him fully. "James, you don't have to do that. I never wanted you to give up something important to you." He shook his head, squeezing my hand gently. "It's not about giving anything up. It's about making space for who I actually am instead of who everyone expects me to be. The pressure, the constant performance of being the straight jock everyone thinks they know. I'm exhausted, Austin. I want to figure out who James actually is when he's not trying to fit into someone else's idea of him." The vulnerability in his voice made my chest tighten with emotion. Over the past few weeks, I'd watched James slowly shed layers of the persona he'd built around himself, revealing glimpses of someone more thoughtful and uncertain than anyone at school realized. "What did Coach say?" I asked softly. He was surprisingly understanding. "Said sometimes you need to step back to move forward." James smiled ruefully. "I think he could sense I haven't been fully present lately anyway." We resumed walking, following the path that wound past the library and toward the quieter section of campus where we'd shared our first kiss. The memory of that night still felt surreal, like something I'd dreamed rather than lived. "My parents are coming for Thanksgiving next week," James continued, his tone becoming more uncertain. "I keep thinking about what I'm going to say to them, or if I'm going to say anything at all." I felt a pang of sympathy for the position he was in. Coming out was never easy, but doing it when everyone in your life had assumptions about who you were made it even more complicated. "There's no timeline you have to follow," I reminded him. "You don't owe anyone an explanation until you're ready to give one." "I know that logically," he sighed. "But keeping this secret from them feels wrong too. Especially when this," he gestured between us, "feels like the most honest thing in my life right now." We'd reached our bench, the same one where everything had changed between us, and James tugged gently on my hand to guide us toward it. The campus was quiet around us, most students already back in their dorms for the night. "Can I tell you something?" I asked as we settled onto the bench, James immediately shifting closer so our shoulders touched. "Always. These walks used to be about running away from my feelings. From wanting something I was convinced I could never have." I turned to look at him, still sometimes amazed that I could be this open with him. Now they're about running towards something instead, toward this version of us that I never dared to imagine. James was quiet for a moment, his thumb tracing gentle circles on the back of my hand. I used to think being honest about who I am would make me lose everything that mattered. But sitting here with you, I'm starting to realize I never really had those things in the first place. Not if they required me to hide the most important parts of myself. The sincerity in his voice made my heart skip. So what happens now? Now we keep walking, he said simply. Together. And we figure out the rest as we go. He leaned over and kissed me then, soft and sure in a way that still made my breath catch. When we broke apart, he rested his forehead against mine. I love you, he whispered, the words still new enough between us to carry extra weight. I love you too, I whispered back, meaning it more than I'd ever meant anything. We sat there for a while longer, wrapped up in each other and the quiet certainty of what we were building. When we finally stood to head back to our dorm, James kept my hand firmly in his, no longer worried about who might see. Our late-night walks continued, but they were ours now, a shared space where we could be exactly who we were, without apology or explanation. And as we made our way back across campus, I realized that sometimes the best journeys weren't about reaching a destination at all, but about finding the right person to walk alongside.